I stood motionless on the doorstep, an old suitcase with frayed zippers in my hand. Oregon's gray sky held no rain, only cold. The chill didn't come from the weather. It came from the way the boy I once raised called someone over to change the lock right behind me. The wooden door slammed shut. No greeting, no backward glance. The two-story house where I'd spent 20 years tending every brick now belonged to someone else. On paper, in name, and in the heart of the adopted son I once believed would be my refuge in old age. Ethan said, "You should find a place more suitable for your age. This is no longer your home." I didn't ask why. In recent months, I had seen enough signs. Since Ethan started letting his girlfriend move in, I had been edged out of dinners, company meetings, every important matter in the house I had built from nothing. I stepped down the porch like a sleepwalker, past the front garden where I once planted lavender and wild daisies. The flower beds had been replaced by stone tiles and statues, for better feng shui, Ethan's girlfriend had said. I stayed silent. Every time, I stayed silent. I took a room at a small motel more than 10 miles away. Stay was the word, but I didn't sleep. All night I sat in a worn wooden chair, arms around my suitcase, staring through a misted window. Only one question echoed in my mind. Where did I go wrong? I had raised him since he was 6, scraped together every penny to feed him, educate him, help him start a career. I cashed out my early retirement to help him open a company. And now, when I had nothing left to give, I was thrown out like a stranger. I thought my life would end quietly. A small rented room, some volunteer shifts at church, counting the days one by one. But I had no idea that, just 1 week later, my life would take a completely different turn, beginning with the eyes of a stranger at a charity gala in Portland. I went to church on Sunday morning. Sitting among strangers, listening to the steady voices of the choir, I felt a little less empty. In a corner of the pew, I opened my wallet and pulled out a tiny photo wedged between 2 worn pieces of plastic. A little boy, blonde hair, dimples, smiling wide in the aisle of a supermarket. The picture was cut from an old surveillance video. The day I lost my son. I was 27 then, recently divorced, working 2 jobs to support my child. One weekend morning, I took Nathan to the supermarket to grab some snacks. He wanted to go back to the candy aisle and slipped into the crowd. I got caught behind the shopping cart and couldn't keep up. I ran through the aisles, shouting his name until I lost my voice. The staff called the police right away. There were cameras, images, a search that lasted for months. But then nothing. It was as if he had vanished from the world. People tried to comfort me with the usual phrases. Maybe someone kind took him in. He might come back someday. But I lived every day with a void nothing could fill. Every time I saw a child run across the street, my heart would ache. That pain never faded, not for 3 years. When I turned 30, I visited an orphanage on the outskirts of Portland. And there I met Ethan. The boy sat quietly in a corner, hands clasped, his eyes not sad but trained in the art of not expecting anyone. When I sat down beside him, he didn't say a word. He just tilted his head and looked at me, so much like Nathan. It was that look that made me bring Ethan home. No need for much paperwork, I accepted becoming his guardian. Not to replace, but to fill the space I couldn't name. Ethan wasn't easy. He always kept his distance. But I was patient. I believed that love, given enough time, could reach any heart. I did everything a real mother would. Drove him to school, taught him how to bake, bought him his first guitar. I never mentioned Nathan. I was afraid comparisons would hurt Ethan, or worse, trap me in old grief again. For 20 years, I chose to love Ethan like it was fate. I turned down marriage, turned down other life paths, just to make sure he had enough, felt safe, and would succeed. And then, just a few months after my 60th birthday, he pushed me out of the very house I'd laid the first brick for. Every brick, every loan. I sat in that motel room, staring at Nathan's photo again. I didn't know where he was, if he was alive, if he was happy. But I knew one thing. If I ever saw him again, even once, I would tell him I never stopped looking. What I didn't know was that this wish was about to come true. The local church organized a fundraiser for homeless children, and the pastor said to me, "Mrs. Margaret, we really need someone to help with cookies and lemonade. Yours are the best in town." I smiled gently and nodded. At least here, I still had value. That afternoon, I stood behind a table covered with a white cloth, busy pouring drinks into paper cups. People came in crowds of all ages. I didn't pay much attention until a deep, clear male voice spoke. "Are you Margaret Wilson?" I looked up. Standing before me was a man in his early 30s, tall, neatly dressed but modest. There was something in his face I couldn't look away from. I nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm Margaret." He smiled, but there was something choked in his eyes. I'm Nathan Foster. I came from San Francisco. I think you might be my biological mother." I gripped the lemonade pitcher tightly. Everything inside me froze. A few seconds passed like an endless vacuum. I didn't dare to ask. I didn't dare to hope. But then he opened his wallet and showed me something small. A piece of paper from a supermarket surveillance camera in 1988. The photo I had kept for decades. But this one was the original, not the faded print I carried in my wallet. Nathan told me he got lost after hiding behind a delivery truck, and when someone finally found him, the truck had gone too far. He was so young then, he couldn't remember his address or any details, just his name and his mom's name. The local police posted a search notice, but no one came to claim him. So he was taken to an orphanage. Later, a couple who had struggled with infertility adopted him. He started searching for his birth mother after his adoptive father passed away from cancer. A series of DNA tests on family search platforms, countless inquiries without answers. Until one day, he saw a group photo posted by a local church's Facebook account. Nathan said, "The moment I saw your eyes, I knew. I can't explain it, but I knew." I burst into tears. The tears poured out uncontrollably. He told me he now runs a high-end jewelry company in San Francisco, has his own legal team, and more than anything, he wants to help me reclaim everything that was taken from me. 3 days after a meeting, I boarded my first flight in over a decade. Ethan had booked me a ticket to San Francisco. Nathan's company headquarters was in a tall glass building in the financial district. I was overwhelmed, but he just smiled and held my hand, walking me in as if I'd belonged there all along. Conference room on the 18th floor. 4 people were already waiting. One was a lawyer specializing in asset fraud and unlawful transfers. One was a handwriting expert. Another was a civil investigator, someone with years of experience. Nathan asked me to recount every detail of how the house, the small business, and the savings account were transferred, step by step, document by document, signature by signature. I had kept some old photocopies in a folder, the only thing I carried with me when I was kicked out. The handwriting expert frowned as he examined one transfer document. He said, "This signature shows signs of forgery. The pen pressure is inconsistent, and it may have been produced using a scanned, print, overlay technique. I'll need more time, but the case is strong." The lawyer nodded quietly. 2 weeks later, Ethan received a court summons from the Oregon District Court, requiring him to explain the property transfers suspected of elder exploitation and abuse of trust. I didn't tell Ethan where I was. No messages. No reproach. This was no longer about mother and son. It was about conscience and the law. Nathan submitted a thick file along with the lawsuit. Full financial records, transfer histories, and audio recordings I had secretly made during my final days in the house. No one feels joy suing the child who once called them mom. But I understood, if I didn't fight for the truth, I would lose not just property, but dignity, identity, and memory. One afternoon, as we stood outside the state courthouse, Nathan looked at me. He didn't smile, just gently asked, "Are you ready to take back what's yours, Mom?" I didn't answer. I just tightened my grip on his hand and walked into the courtroom ahead. The courtroom that day wasn't crowded. Only a few observers, some local journalists, and the familiar faces from my 20 years of running a small bakery. Former employees, loyal customers, the elderly neighbor who lived next to the church. Ethan walked in wearing a charcoal gray suit, neat as if he were attending a business strategy meeting. His girlfriend sat beside him, heavily made up, clutching a folder tightly. They didn't look at me. My lawyer, also the one Nathan had hired, presented our case slowly and clearly. One by one, the pieces of evidence were shown. Transfer documents lacking proper notarization, audio recordings containing threatening language, and the handwriting expert's report showing clear inconsistencies. The whole room was silent. The opposing attorney tried to argue that I had voluntarily transferred the assets to Ethan, that I had been fully lucid at the time, and that this was a private family matter that shouldn't be taken to court. But what they didn't expect was that Nathan, the biological son now confirmed by DNA testing, would also take the stand. The room stirred as Nathan presented financial records showing that Ethan had transferred most of the assets into personal accounts and withdrawn company funds to invest in private deals, none of which included his mother in any decision. Finally, after a morning of testimony, the court ruled. All asset transfers to Ethan were voided. The house, the savings account, and ownership of the company were returned to me. Ethan was banned from holding any executive role in a business for the next 5 years due to signs of elder abuse. I didn't return to the old house. Even though it was legally mine again, I didn't want to live within walls that had witnessed cold silences, empty dinners, and the sound of doors slamming behind me. I sold it, and used part of the money to buy a small house on the edge of Sausalito Bay, where sea breezes blew, birds glided past the tiled roof, and the waves knocked gently on the wooden balcony every morning. I didn't return to running the pastry company either. I handed it over to a former assistant, the girl who once helped out at the shop back in high school. Now she was a mother of 2, hardworking, and loved the craft just as I once did. I asked only one thing, to keep the original name of the shop, Margaret's Table. The table where I used to knead dough, where Ethan learned to pour milk into baking molds, where a mother once believed that love alone could hold everything together. Nathan visits me every week. Sometimes he brings books, sometimes he just sits and drinks tea, talking with me. He doesn't call me Mrs. Margaret. He calls me Mom. Every time he does, my heart warms up, bit by bit. We've created a new habit. Every Sunday afternoon, we make handcrafted silver bracelets together in the small workshop behind the house. One late afternoon, I asked Nathan, "Were you ever angry at me for losing you?" He shook his head slowly. "No. I think, if we had never lost each other, how would I ever know how precious it is to be found again?" Please like and subscribe for more touching stories.